Have you ever walked into a room and instantly known you weren't invited out of love, but as entertainment? My name is Claire Holloway. I'm 29 years old, and on New Year's Eve, I made the mistake of saying yes to a family dinner invitation that should have gone straight into the trash. The envelope arrived at my apartment in Boston that morning. Thick cream paper. Expensive. Cold. The kind of invitation designed to look elegant while hiding something ugly underneath. It was for New Year's dinner at my family's conservatory in Connecticut. I stared at it for a long time because my body remembered that house before my mind did. That house had a way of smiling at me while sharpening the knife behind its back. I told myself I didn't have to go. I told myself I was too old, too busy, too healed to keep walking into rooms where love always came with judgment. But then hope did what hope always does. It survived just enough to make me stupid. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe this time they just wanted peace. Maybe this time I wouldn't be dragged in as the family disappointment they could point at to make themselves feel brighter. I should have known better. By the time I pulled into the long gravel driveway, the sky had turned that deep winter blue that makes wealthy houses look theatrical. The conservatory glowed beside the main house like a jewel box. Glass walls, iron beams, soft golden light, rows of citrus trees inside. It should have looked beautiful. To me, it looked like a stage. The second I stepped inside, the smell hit me first. Orange peel, candle wax, polished wood, rosemary. And with it came every memory I had spent years trying to outgrow. My father, Richard Holloway, was standing near the head of the table with a drink in his hand, wearing that calm, superior expression men like him mistake for dignity. My younger sister, Vivian, stood beside him in cream silk, glowing with the kind of confidence that only comes from never once having to question whether she belongs. She saw me first and smiled. "Claire," she said, "you actually came." "Invitations usually imply that," I replied. That was the thing about my family. If you didn't arrive armored in sarcasm, you arrived bleeding. My father gave me one slow look and said, "Good. For a moment, I thought Boston had finally taught you how to avoid unwinnable situations." A few people smiled into their glasses. That's how it always worked with them. Public cruelty softened by polished manners, clean enough to deny, sharp enough to wound. Dinner was perfect, of course. White linen, crystal glasses, candlelight. A table designed less for comfort than for display. For the first half hour, everything moved the way these nights always moved. Champagne, small talk, carefully performed affection. Vivian talked about a luxury branding campaign she had just led. My father praised her instincts, her polish, her ambition. Then his eyes slid to me. "And Claire," he said, lifting his glass, "is still digging through archives in attics, rescuing the reputations of dead collectors." A few people laughed politely. I set down my fork. "It's called provenance research," I said. "It keeps museums from displaying stolen art and forged history. So yes, I'm still doing real work." Vivian tilted her head and smiled. That always sounds noble when you say it quickly. More laughter. And right then, I knew. I hadn't been invited to reconnect. I had been invited to complete the picture. Vivian was the success, my father was the patriarch, and I was the contrast, the shadow, the failure, the reminder of what not to become. The cruel part wasn't that they were doing it. The cruel part was that some small, humiliating part of me had still hoped they wouldn't. Dessert arrived, a dark chocolate tart, and that's when my father finally said the quiet part out loud. He leaned back in his chair, looked straight at me, and said, "You know, we only invited you out of pity. I told Vivian it would look bad if we started the year without including you at least once." Silence hit the table. Then came that awful kind of laughter, the nervous kind people use when they don't know whether they're witnessing a joke or a crime. Vivian lifted her glass and added, "Don't stay too long. I know this level of success must be exhausting for you to witness up close." That was the moment something inside me went completely still. Not broken, not shattered, clear. Because the truth was, they had both made one massive mistake. They thought I was powerless. What they didn't understand was that the Vermont cabin Vivian kept casually referring to, the one she used for retreats, the one my father showed off to investors like it was proof of family stability, wasn't theirs. It never had been. It belonged to me. My grandmother left it to me specifically, not shared, not symbolic, legally mine. And for years, I had been quiet enough to let them pretend otherwise. They used it, entertained there, built business images around it, hosted clients there, created an entire fantasy around a property they didn't own. And because I was tired, because I wanted peace, because grief makes fools of us all, I let it happen. Until that night. Vivian leaned toward me and said softly, "Be honest, Claire, doesn't it embarrass you, walking into rooms like this and knowing you'll never be the person anyone is actually waiting for?" That line would have destroyed me once. Instead, I looked at her and thought, "You really have no idea how much of your life depends on things you never bothered to understand." I smiled and said, "You'd be surprised." For the first time all night, neither of them answered immediately. I left the table when coffee was served and walked into the library, the only room in that house that had ever felt honest. Dim light, brass lamps, dying fire, silence. I called Daniel Mercer, my closest friend and an estate attorney in New York. He picked up on the second ring and said, "You sound like you're calling from inside a very expensive murder mystery." "I'm at New Year's dinner." "That bad?" "I wasn't invited out of love," I said. "I was invited to be mocked." He went quiet. "What are you trying not to say, Claire?" I stared out into the dark yard and said the thing I had finally become ready to admit. "I want to sell the cabin." Daniel didn't rush. "Because it's valuable, or because it's the last thing tying you to the family you wish you had?" That landed hard. Because the cabin wasn't just property, it was memory. My grandmother teaching me to split kindling, summer mornings by the lake, the last place family had ever felt safe. Selling it meant accepting something I had avoided for years. Nostalgia is not a legal strategy, and pain does not become love just because it happened in a beautiful place. "Can I do it quickly?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "The title is clean. The only real question is whether you're ready for what happens when they realize you mean it." I thought about my father's face, Vivian's smile, the pity line. "Yes," I said, "I am." When I walked back into the conservatory, they were exactly where I'd left them, comfortable, careless, entertained. My father looked up. "There you are. We thought you fled." "No, I just needed a quiet room to make a decision." Vivian smiled lazily. "Should we be worried?" I looked at both of them and said, "Yes." That one word changed the room. I sat down, folded my napkin, and said, "I'm selling the cabin." The reaction was immediate. Vivian went pale. My father froze. "That's not funny," she snapped. "I'm not joking." My father leaned forward. "That cabin is family property." "No, it's family mythology. Legally, it's mine." He knew I was right. He had seen the deed years ago. He'd just spent too long believing confidence could override paperwork. "You wouldn't dare," he said. "I already made the call." Vivian stood so fast her chair scraped the floor. "Claire, stop. I have spring clients booked there." "Then maybe," I said, "you should have remembered who owns it before humiliating me in public." My father rose more slowly, colder now. "Do you have any idea what you're interfering with?" There it was. Not memory, not family, money. He had been using that cabin to project stability to business partners. Vivian had been using it for private off-book client hospitality. Neither of them cared about the place. They cared about access. And access was over. "If you do this," my father said, "don't expect to remain part of this family." That threat would have hurt once. Now it just sounded late. "I invited you here out of pity," I said. "You called me a failure. I'm just adjusting my assets to match your honesty." Then I picked up my coat and walked out. The next 7 days were the cleanest week of my adult life. Painful, yes, but clean.